Okay, we're recording. Welcome. Take it away,
All right.
Betty.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Dr. Betty Tonsing, and I want to welcome you to the Indiana Council on World Affairs. I'm seeing wonderful old friends. I am seeing new friends, as many of you saw me greet Elaine. Thrilled to see her. I love seeing new people, and I love hearing how you heard about us. The word is growing. We have a very special guest this evening, and she had asked how long we have been doing this. And some of you go back many years and remember when we were doing this in person. And I know that we all still do miss seeing each other. That was really wonderful. And we still talk about maybe trying something going forward in the future where one or two times a year we can do that in person. But we have grown, our audience has grown so much, and our capacity to bring in exciting speakers like this evening's speaker has expanded because of this virtual programming. And so it's very exciting, but we still have the robust Q&A. And that makes it really great. So welcome very much. We are just midway into our 2022-2023 program year for distinguished speakers, which is where you are at this evening. Some of you will also come to Great Decisions. And I'm going to be introducing Ray Montaño, who is going to introduce our speaker. And I will join you again at the very end of the evening and tell you about the future programs. But for right now, we have an exciting speaker with you this evening. I spent 11 years, I should have mentioned to the ambassador, I spent 11 years in Africa.
Nice.
And I was in Southern Africa. I went initially with the United Nations. And I continued doing other work with USAID and other, I did my PhD also while there. And so I considered Africa to be my second home for many, many years. I was homesick for a very long time. I've been back a couple of times.
Didn't you get married in Liberia?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I did. Well, yeah, we met. He was a Fulbrighter. I was the UN in Lesotho. We were in Lesotho, and we were also in South Africa later. We honeymooned in Liberia, Donald. Doesn't everybody honeymoon in Liberia? I mean, there were palm trees on the beach. I mean, that's all you needed. Actually, I think I told you the truth was we took Pan Am home, and we because we were older, we met and married. We knew right away. There didn't have to be a 2-year engagement. We took Pan Am, and the refueling stop, as you may remember, was Monrovia. We thought, well, just stop off in Monrovia and have our honeymoon on the way back. And that's what we did. It was delightful. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. So this evening, Ray, please introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Betty. First of all, I want to welcome everyone. The ICWA, of course, is the premier organization in the state of Indiana for providing addressing international issues, and we're really privileged tonight to have the ambassador with us. Professor Mathilde Mukantabana is an ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary of the Republic of Rwanda to the United States of America, and a non-resident ambassador to Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. I must keep her pretty busy, I guess. She's got a lot of responsibilities there. Prior to her appointment, Ambassador Mukantabana was a tenured professor of history at Cosumnes River College in Sacramento, California from 1994 to 2013. She is also the co-founder and president of Friends of Rwanda Association, a non-for-profit American relief association created in the wake of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. In addition, under the aegis of the United Nations Development Programs, Ambassador Mukantabana started the academic program of social work at the National University in Rwanda in 1999. Ambassador Mukantabana has been a passionate community organizer for several decades and was co-founder of many associations and organizations whose main purpose was to promote positive engagement and collaboration of the Rwandan communities in the United States with other groups and organizations for the benefit of their respective countries. She is an active board member of the Holocaust and Genocide Studies program at Sonoma State College in California, and belongs to many local and international organizations, including the International Association of Genocide Scholars and the Organization of African Leaders in Diaspora that she co-founded and currently serves as the board chair. In her capacity as college professor and as president of Friends of Rwanda Association, Ambassador Mukantabana has organized numerous domestic and international workshops and conferences on genocide and on the Rwandan experience. Ambassador Mukantabana has won many awards that attest to her accomplishments, including the 2012 Peace and Justice Award from the Center for African Peace and Conflict Resolution, Peace and Global Study Award on behalf of the Friends of Rwanda Association, awarded by the Global Majority in 2012, and the Crystal Apple Award for Best Instructor at Cosumnes River College in 2012. In addition, she was listed in Who's Who Among Professionals in America in 2003. She is fluent in English, French, Kinyarwanda, I'm not sure what that language is, Kinyarwanda, and Kirundi. Ambassador Mukantabana holds a bachelor's degree in history and geography from the University of Burundi, as well as a master's degree in social work with a special emphasis in community organization, planning, and administration, and a Master of Arts in History from California State University in Sacramento. After the ambassador's her opening remarks, I'll be turning the program over to Donald Cassell, who's a ICWA board member and senior fellow and director of Liberian initiatives at the Sagamore Institute. Donald will moderate the Q&A program of our program. Right now, though, I'd like to welcome the ambassador to the ICWA in Indiana, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ray Montagno. Thank you for your kind introduction. I also thank Dr. Betty Thompson for her overall view of the program this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I needed to take this opportunity to thank the Indiana Council on World Affairs and Sagamore Institute, and also my friend, Dr. Donna Cassell, for your invitation. I'm delighted to be here with you today to engage in this timely conversation on the US-Africa relationship. And I'm sure you have really your reason to pick me as Ambassador of Rwanda among your invited guests to speak on this important topic. And therefore, in my brief remarks, we relate that broader relationship through the lenses of my country, Rwanda, and for a good reason. Rwanda's story and its leadership position, both in the domestic and continental global arena, mirrors various milestones reached and aspiration of our continent, Africa. But also, as Rwandans, as our leadership, we are aware that Rwanda's experience was and is an African one. So we are really Africa. We are part of Africa, and our experiences are similar. The challenges and prospects we have today are not unique to us. They are shared by most African countries, and we have unique opportunities as Africans to take responsibility of our fate and to find common solutions. I can give you an example as we begin. For instance, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it was highlighted to the world, and especially to us Africans, some of the weaknesses that we have to urgently overcome together. There's a Kinyarwanda saying that I needed to repeat to you. They say, "Akimuhana kazi imvura ihise." It means really in translation that help from somewhere else will come after the rains have passed. So as Africans, we have come together to try to deal with the problems, existential problems we have as a continent. There's a sense of urgency to build and strengthen all our African institutions, such as, for instance, health institutions, ensuring that our people are cared for before any other pandemics or other calamities hit. You've also, the other example maybe I can give you is the war in Ukraine. It has affected our continent, and the preparation is paramount together to mitigate the effects of that war that we didn't provoke. Rwanda, like most African countries, has a young population. We have a generation of young people seeking to be part of the political solutions and economic solutions that our world, and be part in sustainable economic development and other broad developmental agenda. So I'm going to give a brief overview on Rwanda and Africa together, because one of the things you'll find is that we have been a piece and a parcel of the development of the African Union, especially in the latest decades. and especially the involvement of our president as the head of many institutions at the African Union. Rwanda joined the African Union on May 25th, 1963. And he has been an active member, especially in the last few decades. His Excellency President Paul Kagame is among influential African leaders who have shaped the positive trends within our continent and within the African Union as an institution. It is the, as we speak, it is the African Union institutional reforms that are taking us to the Africa we want. While chairing the African Union in 2018-2019, a number of continental projects that have taken us from aspirational to operational took place under his leadership. And one of the most important one, maybe I can talk about, is African Continental Free Trade Area. That was launched as this, a single, African Continental Free Trade that you've heard about, and I talk about it again when you go to the US-Africa relationship. But also the single African air transportation markets, adoption of the protocol of free movement of persons in goods and African passport. The establishment of the development agency we know as AUD NEPAD and more. So our President Kagame, just concluded yesterday, as we speak, because there's an African Union summit taking place right now. He just concluded his leadership at the head of that NEPAD, African Union Developmental Agency, that I just talked about. But also he was selected to lead the AU Domestic Health Financing Initiative in February 2019. He has been a staunch advocate for the initiative, especially in mobilizing African stakeholders to invest in health before we can even go to other panels. And from 2016 to date, as we speak, he's still leading the AU institutional reform. And the big lines of the reform, I'm going to touch on them quickly because then maybe the discussion is going to be on them. Some of them are, and this is leading us to what we call Agenda 2063. That is a statement of what we are looking for to achieve for our whole continent, the Africa we want. So there's institutional realignment, connect with Africans, operational effectiveness, and efficiency and sustainable financing. Many things are going to happen as we are speaking. So by looking at AU Agenda 2063, or the Africa we want, it captured the aspiration of the African people for a continent that is integrated, peaceful, and prosperous. And that is also poised to take its rightful place in the global arena. So for that, I can maybe go to the United States because by understanding what Africa is positioning itself for becoming, and I started by saying that we went from aspirational to operational. Just to give one example. My country by itself, we've removed the barriers that were imposed by colonial power, meaning that we started by opening barriers for trade. Any African going to Rwanda, they don't need any visa. As a matter of fact, it's global. You can get a visa at the airport, but what I'm saying from Africa, it's a visa-free country. Mm-hmm. But also try to exchange in many other ways. So the operation we are talking about is opening the door for people to collaborate, for circulation of goods, of people, and so on and so forth. So that could be captured when we go back to the question. With the United States and Africa, of course, there has been a commitment between Africa and the United States in partnering to work towards these goals through not only enhancing and strengthening the existing cooperation mechanism, but particularly through exploring innovative partnerships based on the inherent strategic importance and the value proposition of the African continent. So also by broadening and deepening their partnership in a variety of fields, the US and Africa are set to reap substantial common dividends. Such renewed engagement was seen, for instance, with the USA Africa Leader Summit that we are going to be discussing at length. But we also paved the way to a breakout of international competition over resources towards a wider horizon of partnership and common interests. The common avenue of new and ongoing partnership between the United States and the African Union, including health and security. So I mentioned maybe the big ones, health and security, the continued existence of the US-Africa Partnership on Public Health and cooperation in global health, including continuation of the Presidential Emergency Plan for HIV, PEPFAR, that has been a godsend for most of our countries when we were facing the scourge of HIV and AIDS. COVID-19 recovery and international crisis mitigation policies. So we have been opening door for collaboration towards mitigation, like a COVID-19, but also crisis that resulted from international conflict, like the ones we were mentioning, the war in Ukraine, and then scarcity of grain, scarcity of fertilizers, and all this kind of stuff that we incurred when the war took place. Finally, there's been a US commitment to stepping up the G20 common framework for debt treatment beyond the debt service suspension initiative to ease increasing debt vulnerabilities in Africa. So there are tangible things that we are doing with the United States. Of course, we can do more. Cooperation for food and nutrition security, sustainable agriculture is big. Efforts towards upscaling investment in a program already in place, such as Feed the Future. Those are programs that have been signed on again by the United States, and especially by increasing numbers of countries that can participate in Feed the Future and so on and so forth. The climate change resilience, during the summit, Rwanda was just given an amount of more than 300 million by the IMF because of resilience, climate change resilience, but also the practices that our countries have been in the forefront to stem the crisis of climate change in our region. So all these things, then economic development, infrastructure, investment, and trade. African countries are looking to the US for a commitment to support the African continental free trade area. Initially, as you know, most of the time before we had the African continental free trade, US was mostly dealing on bilateral basis, but now, especially during the Leader Summit, there was a commitment by the United States now to deal with the continent at large. And I can say much on that, but this is something that is potentially going to open the door to really meaningful engagement, and especially a win-win situation where both continents are going to benefit, Africa and the United States. The AFCA brings together about 55 member states and the African Union, covering about a market of more than 1.2 billion people. So when we created that single continental market for goods and services with the free movement of business people and investment, it paves the way for accelerating the establishment of the customs union, but also it will expand intra-African trade that is going to be beneficial for US in terms of quantity, in terms of quality, and many other things. Also, vice versa, also for Africa, the trade coming from the United States and the African trade going to the United States. So I think that I'm going to, in terms of what we can do together, I'm going to leave it there. We needed to understand also, we collaborate on a number of other things, other initiatives, especially I can talk with certainty because my country is part of it, cooperation on peace and security. There's a mutual commitment to address the root causes of conflict and terrorism throughout the world through holistic approaches that is putting all the key players together. And as you know, my country is one of the biggest participants in peacekeeping, both on UN, but also on bilateral. on a bilateral basis on countries who have called Rwanda to go and to help in stemming or in mitigating terrorism or other things or other conflicts in their countries. And finally, maybe what I can say is that the human capital, youth, women, Africa is the youngest continent. About 60% of Africa population is under the age of 25. So it's therefore imperative that we create educational and job opportunities, skills development for youth in science, technology, research, and innovation. So the new US-Africa Innovation Agenda that will aim at supporting scientific cooperation, technology sharing, and expertise, and developing partnership between universities will move the needle of the African youth. So we are working on many different things in that area as well. And there are many development, especially within the education, both on the federal level, but also with various institutions, including some of the institutions you present. So we can talk about this. So these are some of the things I can talk about, promoting women economic empowerment and inclusion. And the last one I have to talk about, because it's very important, especially where we are, the African diaspora. You know, harnessing the African diaspora to bear on the development of the continent, Africa, but also on the United States. The United States is home to a vast majority of the African diaspora. And the role of the African diaspora in US history, society development, their potential role as an assertive actor for a more enhanced US-Africa relationship is even growing now more than before. And the participation in the building and development of the African continent is crucial. Migration will increase as well in the future as more people look for better economic, social, and environmental opportunities. And then Africa needs close collaboration with all the key partners in this to take fully or to optimize on the diaspora, whether it's in the US and other places in the world. The US has committed to establishing by June this year, a diaspora advisory board within the State Department. So it's a major development that is going to also help African countries as we call more on our African diaspora to be participants in their country development. So what African leaders have in many ways expressed and what we have agreed on is to have always African position on global issues so as to have a unified and strong voice. African solution to African problems, but with valid partnerships. And this is what we are looking for. And all our partners, all of us, partners included, should be in support of a strong and thriving Africa because it benefits everyone. We were gratified by the United States' support for including Africa on global governance bodies. In the last time we met during the Africa Leaders Summit, including being a part of G20, but also being part of the United Nations Security Council, to have a voice there, because that's the right thing to do. And that I think will bring closer to the Africa we want, but also the Africa you want, because this is, it's really a win-win situation. So let me finish here by thanking the Indiana Council on World Affairs and Sacramento Institute and Dan for inviting me. And I'm ready for your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Mukantabana. We really appreciate your presence here with us. Just make sure, just to tell the audience that what's going to happen is that I'm going to have some time with Ambassador Mukantabana, ask him some guided questions. And then once that time is over, we'll open it up for, well, the room session with the ambassador. She prefers that more so than even the talks that she just gave us. So to start with, Ambassador, the first question that I have here, even though Betty acknowledged the level of education and involvement of our audience, and that is very true. Nevertheless, I think some of the audience may not be as familiar with the AU, the African Union. And so what I want you to do a little bit is to try to describe a bit for them how is it that this organization could presume to represent all of Africa, nearly 1 billion people, about 50-some countries. What is it? What kind of organization is it that the United States could, in some respect, deal with directly like that, and it would be dealing with Africa?
So thank you so much. Yeah, the African Union, as it says, is the union of all the African countries, the 55 of us on the continent. Initially, it was called the Organization of African Unity, and it was changed in, I forgot the year, but
in the 90s, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So it was changed, and it reflects the aspiration, Africa, it comes from a position that most of all our states went through the same experience. We have a commonality of interest, and we have issues to deal with. So that organization was started by the first individuals who fought also for our independence. And they felt that for us to be able to face the world and to come from the formidable challenges we have faced through colonialism and other things, we needed unity, because no single country could do it by itself. So our leaders got together, and the institution has been growing, of course, like many other institutions. What I was saying is that by now we have, at least we have the defined commonalities of interest. And all the countries are partaking in designing the Africa we want. So it takes conversation, it takes building, it takes proven in true methods. But what I can say is that we've gotten to a point where we are looking at the commonalities where we are all linked together, our destinies linked together. Doesn't mean that countries won't exist, but we are going to, in essence, maybe how I can summarize it is that, and maybe it can take me back quickly to history. One of the most conspicuous legacy of colonialism has been also imposed borders, but also the exploitation of resources of Africa that really didn't help the continent. If you go back and look at Africa and the dividends Africa is even drawing from their own resources, it's nothing, because the intra-African trade is lagging. It's not even 20%. So what we are doing is to see how Africa can develop. We can't develop with what we have or what we had, meaning that those artificial boundaries or borders that were imposed have also established inability for us to be able to be, even as we are calling for people to come and invest, we need first to be even investing in our own territory, in our own continent, meaning that those boundaries have to be removed. So the continental free trade we are talking about is not going to erase the national boundaries or the ones left by colonialism, but it will remove them pretty much really completely, because they remove them symbolically, they remove them in a way that they'll be able to exchange goods, they'll be able to exchange people, they are going to exchange, anything that knowledge. So one example I can give you, and why, for instance, even talking about Rwanda and looking at Africa, when we start a university or what we do, like a mathematical institution or African Leadership University, or even Carnegie Mellon Data in Rwanda, those are open for all the Africans. So it's about educational setting, it's about goods, it's about trade, it's about everything. So we have studied that system and we are at a point now we are implementing what we have set out to do for the Agenda 2063. 2063 is going to bring a unified Africa in many different ways, where not only are we going to use all the resources we have that can make our continent one of the best ever, but also to be able to exchange with the rest of the world in a way that is inequality, not where, because at this particular point, even though we have resources, but they are not benefiting Africans for the majority of it. We are still having that kind of an unequal partnership in many different ways. So that's why I'm saying that getting together, and we are far, you know, as we are meeting right now today, the AU of today is different from the AU of 10 years ago. We've reached a lot. The reforms that we are following, that were said, are happening right now. It's not something that is just aspirational. So that's why I'm saying that, you know, we can give you all the mechanism of the AU, but what I can say is that it's an organization that is putting our people together to optimize in what we have and to be the best that we can ever be as a continent. And I think that's where we are.
Ambassador, do you think it's just so that our audience, been an American audience for the most part, though I did invite lots of Liberian people and lots of African people, but our audience will probably be heavily American. Do you think to give them a good sense of it is to say, to understand the AU, a good reference point will be something like the EU? So the African Union, a good reference point will be something like the European Union. Do you think that will be fair for us to give them a reference point like that?
It might be the idea about getting together for strength is similar, but also I have to say we are learning from mistakes made by others. So we are not doing completely the EU. But at the same time, it's the idea of coming together so we can, you know, be mutually beneficial to each other. Each single country, we are all but with one, you know. So each can draw dividends from becoming part of the big one, a big whole. So this, and that will be something that could bring development to our continent, because we have small countries, we have rich countries, we have poor countries, but they can all contribute with whatever they have to the overall development of the continent. And that can also help poorest nation to come on, you know, to be on a par with the other countries. But what you are saying as an example, that will be it. It's try to come together. But as I said, our circumstances of EU and African Union are very different. We are coming from different contexts and different histories. So obviously the choices we made are a little bit different, but it's unity.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right, then the next question that I have here, and we still do have time for guided questions. I noticed that many commentators on the U.S. and EU relationships, many commentators speak about the U.S.-EU relationships, have not unreasonably focused on the U.S. The U.S. brings a whole lot of advantages and all that. But in your opinion, what is on offer from the AU side, the African Union? What are we offering? What does Africa bring to the relationship? What are the AU's strategic interests in the United States? So what I'm saying is that the United States has a strategic interest in Africa, and they've made that clear. Does the AU equally has a strategic interest in the United States?
Absolutely. I think that United States has a strategic interest in Africa. And by the way, let me say that, and maybe by starting, I have to say that interest of US was always there. There was always interest of the United States and other countries in Africa, but the interest was not matching. Actually, the question I would ask is now the interest of Africa matching the one United States has? And that's what we are trying to build. That's what we are trying to build, that kind of equal partnership, because before we are all here and we know very well that Africa always was interesting to the rest of the world. But the way it was interesting to the rest of the world was one way. It was never an exchange. So
Yes.
what Africa is trying to do now is to come on the table and to discuss with the United States where they can really have a fruitful exchange, partnership, where they can exchange and US can take the best that is in Africa, and Africa can take the best from the United States on equal exchange, but also in what each continent or country is looking for from the other one. But that's it comes again to the value system and what you bring on the table, and whether Africa was always engaged in what one party can get and the other party can get. Now that's the discussion we are taking right now.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go on to another question here. How would you assess the recently concluded US-AU summit? What can Africa do to improve US-AU relations? What is the AU collective policy towards dealing with the US? What should we be doing to improve the relationship? Every time I read commentators, and they are always focused on the US doing something, and I'm always wondering, how about African people? Do they have a vested interest in this, and what should they be doing to improve relationships with the US?
What I know is that, and speaking for all of us, because we exchange and we have almost monthly ambassadors group from Africa, but also our leaders and what we do, we would love to have a great partnership with the United States. So let me talk briefly about the forum, and then we can go back to this. Having a forum like the one that took place in December, because the leaders were able to meet and get to know each other, but what is important is not so much for a meeting to take place, but it's the implementation of whatever was accepted to be done after. I have to say that for us, you know that this forum that took place in December came after 7 years. This is the longest US would meet with partners. The last one we had was when we met with President Obama. So this is the second one. We have to say, on one hand, I have to say that, so we look forward to working with Ambassador Carson, who was nominated to lead the implementation of what was accepted. There are major commitments. And again, what I'm talking about is about delivery. But anytime that we are called to come and meet, or we call people to come and meet us, it's because we want to improve on the partnership. It's what we are saying, for instance, even talking about that forum, and that was discussed, and I hope it's going to happen. It's because it could be institutionalized, where Africa expect that United States, that would be a beginning already, to say this is something to be expected like the other continents when they meet, or the other countries when they meet. But this is a good one because in the first term of President Biden, he convened that meeting. So it's a good sign. How far are you going to take it? The commitment as well, like the one I just told you about having a voice on the Security Council, or having a voice on G20, that's a beginning. Those are big ones. But it's not so much because we don't articulate what we want and what kind of relationship we have. But without participation in those major forums, without participation and being on the table when for instance, decisions taken for Africa are being taken, no matter how much we want to something, it won't happen. So that's why we are saying this kind of dialogue where people can actually meet and say, articulate their needs, put together what Africa needs from the United States and vice versa, is going to be the thing. As we speak, I know that there are quite a big delegation of US that is in Ethiopia, as the African Union is convening. So I'm sure there'll be good discussion that can also take forward all those, the agreements that were reached when we met in Washington. But what I'm saying, Africa has their own needs. We articulated those even before the summit. We had
Yes.
our wishes forward. We gave our own document. So we are, and that's what we do every day in Washington, D.C. So we try to bring that kind of understanding where people can go and understand where we are coming from and understand the context we live in, and then try to harmonize our actions so it can be a win-win situation.
Yes, and I wonder about it, say if the meeting did not occur, the formal meeting did not occur for 7 years. And I'm curious, when it did occur from President Biden, was it President Biden who made that initiative, or was it the Africans who told President Biden they wanted this meeting to happen?
Definitely, it was a promise that was given whenever we had interactions with the administration, because everyone was seeing that kind of void that was in Washington when it came to treating African issues. And I think, so it was a discussion, an ongoing discussion, but of course, President Biden took the initiative to do the meeting.
So what I'm getting at is that are we to understand that since, okay, so President Biden took the initiative. So the 7 years ago, President Obama took that initiative. And what I'm wondering is that between that 7 years, was Africa knocking on the door, telling the U.S. officials that we wanted to have this meeting with them, and they were ignoring us? Do you know that? Do you know that was the case, that we were really trying to reach out to them in that 7 years gap, and they were saying, no, we don't want to meet, and then finally we get a response, a positive response from President Biden?
You know how diplomacy works. The doors and engagements with the countries or with the part of Africa, we were also putting together our continental free trade. So
yes,
on bilateral basis, everyone, I think we know, or even collectively, we always talked about that increased engagement. So it was always mentioned, not to just mention, but it was always part of our agenda as we're pushing in Washington. So it's not something that it was not one time only, but the dissatisfaction came from the fact that it took 7 years. But what I'm saying is that both our sides and the people in administration were always pushing to have another African engagement in many different
okay.
Yeah.
Now, closely related to that question is that I heard many African leaders complain about the fact that on this meeting with President Biden, that there was no agenda. They mentioned that in the other meetings they've had, for instance, with the U.S. strategic competitor, China, or with the Europeans, there's always been a clear agenda involved. I think maybe even with the British. And they said there was no agenda. And according to some of them that I heard and saw on video and whatnot, that they have seen the lack, because there was no agenda, it display a sort of disrespect toward African leaders. And if it was not an outright disrespect, it was a classic case of the US not taking Africa seriously. So my question here is that, what are your thoughts on their concerns? I'm not a diplomat and I'm not skilled in diplomacy, but I was wondering if the US didn't provide you with an agenda and you wanted what they had to offer, why could you not create your own agenda and come to the meeting with your agenda?
Before the Africa Summit happened, we had tons of meetings between the people preparing the meetings and ourselves in Washington, especially the ambassadors. And I have to tell you that we were not just sitting and waiting for the agenda to come. We gave a document As a matter of fact, we provide the document and our wishes and what we would like to see happening. So it was not like when it was announced and then they came and we didn't know what was happening. That would be not really accurate to report it down. So now how the agenda was tweaked is another matter, because the person usually who gives a conference or who is inviting you is the one who can treat the question the way they want. But as far as engagement are concerned, we have a document by the ambassadors that was sent, and we met with the people preparing. Dana Banks was preparing for the Africa Summit, and other people from the National Security Council and other people in the State Department. We all had meetings about this meeting. Now, that's not, I'm not putting a judgment on the agenda itself, but I'm saying that it was not something that came and was dropped on our lap. We also had a certain thing. Whether our voices were reflected, this is something that we, and again, maybe what I can say, really thinking in a broader perspective, there's no single agenda. Africa is a continent at the end of it. And we had many heads of states. It's hard to conjure a collective strategy for everyone where you'll be happy. It's going to be always something like this. But the problem also was that this was almost something new. There was no, that was a complaint we always had, that's for sure, about Africa's strategy that is solid enough. So when you are building the first or second meeting or second forum, it won't be as strong as many other ones that you see, for instance, that have been prepared by many and tons of others, where you learn from your mistakes on what you have done wrong. I'm sure this particular summit borrowed from also what the summit by President Obama during that time. And I'm hoping that the third one, hopefully that might happen in Africa, is going to be much better than the second one. So what I'm saying, maybe I'm trying to convey here is that we knew the limitations, even from the beginning of a forum like this, bringing all the heads of states and whatever. But what I'm saying is that when we look at least this is a door was open. There was a crack in the door where we can make it better. And for me, the barometer to measure whether we are getting anywhere is to see whether the commitments are going to be delivered from this particular one. The rest, we can always make it better in the future. And especially if those commitments, making it more, predictable. We know when the people are going to be meeting, not wait for 7 years and stuff like that. So I think that will give more of a measurement on how really to judge this particular summit. So that's why I'm saying that I'm not judging the program for now. That's not the place for it or why I would be judging, because I think what I judge is the outcome for what came out. And so right now, I think Ambassador Carlson is in Africa. I hope he's going to bring more feedback in how we can start delivering and how each country in Africa is really, really going to benefit from this forum. If there's that kind of benefit, then we say, even in the future, we can make it better. We can partake in the preparation. We can do many different things.
Okay. One more question. We get into a point where I'll soon have to open it up, but we still have a few minutes to go, 10 minutes here to go. What I was thinking about is what is the role of Rwanda in fostering AU-US relations? What has been Rwanda's contribution in making AU-US relations a win-win situation? And the reason why I bring it up is that Rwanda has now emerged as one of the better organized, perhaps, in my opinion, perhaps the best run state on the continent, at least south of the Sahara Desert. And I'm wondering, what are they doing to foster better relationships between the US and Africa?
Thank you so much. I think that, as I said before, Rwanda is an interesting part of Africa, and what we do is really, we believe that the strength we have together is greater than the sum of our whatever riches divided. So what we have advocated in terms of Africa, and then I bring it to US, is, and Rwanda was always in the forefront, is in regional integration is big, and continental collaboration and development. So we have this Pan-African spirit. And it's done in action. It's not just what you can talk about. So, and we have a strong collaboration with the African Union as a country. For instance, especially what I can say, we can say the successes we've seen in peacekeeping. Rwanda has been always exemplary, like in Central African Republic, in South Sudan, that some of those countries also called us on a bilateral level because they've seen what we do. Like Central African Republic, we have been there on a bilateral level as well as with the UN. And then we've heard about Mozambique. Mozambique called Rwanda on bilateral basis to go and try to help in fighting against terrorism. So, but we do that, and we always collaborate with the African Union and with the other people. But Rwanda, maybe because of our history and the commitments we've made, especially coming from the history we are coming from, when the peacekeeping and other people were there and were unable to save 1 million people, we made a commitment. So, for instance, when one of the documents that I ask you to read, if you have a chance, like what they call the Kigali Amendment to Peacekeeping, are almost like a guiding light on how peacekeepers should, relate to their job when they go to save people, to save the innocent civilians, and so on and so forth. Now it has been adopted by many countries, including the United States. It's now a matter of doing it, but it's our history, but also it's really taking the accountability process that our country has taken in delivering for their people, but also for our continent. So it goes from what we do for our own people to go into where we are also working with the continent. In peacekeeping, but also like what I was saying, like in doing business, ease of doing business has positioned Rwanda to become a hub to start many different things, because you have, first of all, to look at good governance, but also try to eradicate corruption and many different things that usually impede business. So there are many of those things, tough. It's a tough job, it's a journey, but we are trying to do the best we can. And you've seen that, for instance, we are also open to have a startup. We are daring, we are innovative. Young startup like Zipline have started in Rwanda.
Yes.
An American company. And now you know that tomorrow is going to be used in Ghana, Nigeria, and soon Kenya and Ivory Coast. So we are willing to start something for the betterment of our situation. But in doing that, also we open it to the rest of the continent. So that's why, for instance, it's I think then also environmental conservation efforts and the fight against climate change. We heard that President Biden, he signed on what they call the Kigali Amendment. We are in the forefront to do those things. We have to think ahead. We need to kind of really punch above our waist and try to do what is right, because for Africa, but for ourselves as well. And Americans are leading on high-end tourism in Rwanda, higher education partnerships initiatives. You've heard the Carnegie Mellon.
Yes.
It's a well-established, that has also allowed us to start the startups in Kigali. Kigali Innovation Center is around the Carnegie Mellon and many other universities that are from the United States. So we have a lot in terms of what we do with the United States, but also that highlights Africa as a continent. We understand that Rwanda, without being open to Africa, can't really get far. So that's what we do.
Okay. There's one more question, and then I'll open it up to our audience here, and some of our members also have some questions that I'll open it to. Sometimes Africans and their supporters are often concerned that the U.S. relations with Africa outside of humanitarian and religious interests is primarily transactional. That is, for instance, even myself, I feel that the US at this point is interested in Africa at this moment in time because China, being its major competitor, is in Africa. Are these concerns legitimate? And even if they are legitimate, should that transactional approach trouble the AU, trouble us who try to make policy for Africa? Should we be concerned about that, or should we just say, well, this is the world, this is a hard world, and we just need to know how to work with it?
I think most countries are driven by interest. It's by interest, and with Africa, it's no different in a sense that the way the rest of the world deal with Africa is because of their interest. So, of course, there are people also who bring their humanity, like what you mentioned before, and who come really genuinely trying to do other things that are not driven by interest or interest. But even let's talk about interest. So if we understand that countries are driven by interest, US interests will be well served also by harnessing the incredible potential and assets our continent possess, but in a way that is open. So if I have what you need, it's like and the transaction in that mode is not a bad one. If I have, if I have clothes and you don't have clothes and I can give you whatever, then it's fine. So I call it a transaction. You give me what I need and I give you what you need. Again, but when it comes to other powers, you know, what Africa doesn't like is to be a proxy place for warfare of powers.
A pawn, essentially.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's not what we would like to be. It's to deal with us on our merits because we have enough to offer. And Africa is open to have business with a variety of people and actors, and all of them have their interests. The challenge to us as Africans is to know how, number one, we do our own homework. So what we get is what we deserve, and vice versa. Okay. From anybody, from any key player that is coming in our sphere, whether they are this and that. So that avoids any kind of exploitation. But other than that, being transactional, being open about being transactional, it's fine. You know, you do what you can for your country. I do what I can for my country. Really, to account for just humanitarian reasons for countries to be present, those are a myth most of the time. You know, but the people who are philanthropic, they exist, like what we said. They are church people. There are other people who are coming really genuinely to learn or even to exchange. So we can't really remove that from humanity because our humanity is not all transactional, like what we're saying. But when it comes to interest, like that is something that we need to consider and see when that transaction is fair. You know, for me, I don't mind being transactional as long as the transaction is fair.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador. What I will now open it up. I know that some of our members wanted to ask questions. I think is Larry on the line here? He had sent some questions, and Ray, you had some questions too. There are also lots of questions that people have asked, but I would give you, Ray, that preference. Can you ask those questions yourself, maybe?
Sure. just one question I had was kind of the Russia, China, US influence on internal politics in various African countries. Do these create conflicts? Are there conflicting sort of forces pushing national governments one way or another? And does this create instability in some of these national governments?
Thank you. Yeah, of course, sometimes they do. Sometimes because, and this is not new. You know that, for instance, especially during the Cold War, it was a Cold War between the major powers, but the hot war was fought in our countries.
Yes.
So that was the terrible part. So you remember the war in Angola, it lasted for many years, and it was a Cold War. It means that the powers come, they bring their issues in Africa and they fight, and our people die. So what I'm saying, the conflict continues when you have pressures from both ends. And what I'm saying for us as Africa, or at least what we can do and what we do, is to be open to partnerships, but not to be driven by any partisan, paths. Of course, we have preferences. There are countries, for instance, my country prefers to do partnerships with, but at the same time, Africa, like in other parts of the world, should be left to engage in alliances, partnership with the people they feel more affinity with. So that's what is not there, because again, we are in that kind of convergence where people are still pretty much, I would say, dictating the way we should be living our lives in many different parts of Africa. So it happens again, but not maybe as much as it used to be, but also because Africa, I think, or at least most people are starting to know what we want. That doesn't preclude the fact that we can be taken advantage of. That's not what I'm saying, and by certain power. But that's our own homework. We need to decide who is coming to deplete, who is coming to as a predator, who is coming to do whatever they are coming to do.
Yes. Now, there's a question here. Let's say here, one person, as the potential for a new U.S.-China Cold War grows, or at least as U.S.-China tensions are higher than ever before, how should Africa plan to balance the approach to trade partnership between the U.S. and China? What are the potential pitfalls in balancing this tightrope between these two powers?
And I think really I would love to see somebody answering that question, because I think I think that's where we need those kind of dialogues, and to say, here we are, United States vis-a-vis Africa. Africa comes, and then we discuss this thing and where we are going to draw dividend by partnering with you. The only thing that wouldn't happen, and I don't, and the problem is that by doing that, the decision to say, okay, this will create imbalance if African states go this way or this way. Don't you think that this is the best time to come and actually be there, be on the table and be able to discuss those issues and see, especially if you are my best partner, to know where I came to go, so I don't, take you or destroy whatever you are standing for. So what I'm saying is that those decisions most of the time are done outside of Africa. Let me give you one example, and maybe you can understand what you're saying. When the war in Ukraine took place, of course, we got much pressure, especially the pressure was not so much about Russia or whatever, but we got pressure from everywhere to support or not to support an African country. But the problem was some of the punitive stance. That one, you can find it in Congress where they pass a certain resolution to punish African states that were still getting anything from Russia. So what I'm saying, this was punishing an entire continent. And some of the people were not even aligned with Russia. It's because some of them were still doing, because when it came, some people were still buying like fertilizers, they were buying wheat they were buying, whatever. So when it happened, remember that there were laws saying, that was the best way to punish Russia and to do this and that. But you couldn't punish a whole continent before they could even understand what is coming in. So that's what I'm saying. The problem is that we get the end of the stick before we can even be there to discuss issues, to do many different things. And that's what we are, I'm not saying we are still, we continue to dialogue. We continue that idea of exchanging to get eventually to the place where we can say Africa and US now, there's a certain alignment in understanding. Doesn't mean we agree on everything or other countries for that, but at least to consider that the point of views that are coming from Africa are as valid, are as strong, especially if they are speaking for the continent.
Okay, Larry is on, and Larry had some good question. Larry, could you ask the question that you had sent to me, at least one of them, and then I'll go back to some of our questions from our audience.
Sure, Donald, thank you. And thank you, Madam Ambassador. This is fascinating. I've worked quite a lot in Africa over the last 30 years, and I'm really glad to see the African Union coalescing to be a power in itself. But I did want to focus on Rwanda for just a second and see if there's something that you learned after the 1994 genocide that could be extrapolated to the rest of Africa. And that is a huge amount of foreign aid was pumped into Rwanda at the time. The resources, technology, expertise, technical oversight, and so forth. Some of it, I'm sure, was extremely helpful, and some of it was perhaps frivolous and outdated and unable to be used. And I was curious what you found to be the most helpful and what was really impractical and burdensome. And are there ways that other countries in Africa could use some of this knowledge and some of the oversight that you've applied as you had these resources that other countries might not have had? What have you learned that really would help other countries to move forward to improve the majority of the citizenry and to replace some of the corrupt governments that don't help the majority of the people with more ethical oversight, if you would? I know, I mean, in fact, at the time of the genocide, I was running the Eli Lilly Foundation, pharmaceutical, and we made massive donations of antibiotics through the American Red Cross. Was never sure if they actually got there, but I do know, because I've worked in the health field particularly, that there's been some great advances in terms of shared technology, virtual medicine, where people can contact a hospital physician in the States, for example, and so forth. So what do you think is most helpful? And what do you think that your access to these resources have taught you, so that Rwanda really is a shining star, in Africa, and the way they run things, the oversight and so forth? How could that be applied to other countries in Africa?
Thank you so much, Harry. And thank you so much. And I'm going to start by what you just said, and then I'll go back to other things. I have to say, I can't underscore enough the incredible assistance we received that has helped us to heal and to recover. Just like what you are saying, what you said, because after genocide, there was nothing left. There was, I think we were 100% depending on aid. There was no infrastructure, no system left. There was, everything was gone. So it was almost building from scratch. And I can't say much about, I can't really tell you how much the partnerships that came during that time, the assistance, even after genocide, most people were still dying from HIV, from many different things, from poverty, from disease, from anything you can think of. This is not even a place where you can describe. You remember during that time, people were really giving us a matter of time before the country will cease to exist.
Can somebody cut the Greystock back? Can you cut the? Can you silence your phone? Yes, thank you. Okay, sorry, Ambassador.
No, that's okay. So what I was saying, it was a dead country and partnerships were strong, but you said, what else can I say? So those were great. And especially for people who brought any assistance in health and many other things, all of them. So I can't say much. So we were able to do that because there were people who were standing there and who helped us through that system of recovery. Because as I said, we were given almost where people were saying we either become under UN protectorate forever or we die as a country, we're dead. So that is one. But you were asking me specifically, what can you give to other nations? One of the things that was a constant was that we were lucky to have a good leadership. We understand that the people have to be put in the center. Whatever we did from the moment genocide was stopped, and then we started the long journey of recovery, of rebuilding, of doing many different things. It's because always the people were in the center, always, the Rwandan people. To say, what can I do that my people, number one, of course, they were emergency program, that they can go to sleep without being afraid of being hacked. So the peace and security was paramount. That's why we build on our peace and security. We put all this whole major, vision. The vision is called the Vision 2020, entailed everything, including reconciliation. All the things we put in place was to try to bring people together, to understand that whether we wanted it or not, we have a country, good or bad, we had to mold, chaff and grind and make a nation. So from that, we started the rebuilding, and the rebuilding was always to take the people together with us. So the leadership, we had to go with the people, because to buy in, to be able to say, we are doing this as a nation, it's not one individual doing it, I think helped our people also can show you why we are where we are. Because the development of Rwanda is not one person development. It's not because of donations. It's because all the Rwandans have partaken in what we are doing to try to have a nation that is better than what it was there. So I can give you a number of programs that were specific, but what I can tell you is that you say, how can you help other nations? We are not, we are humble to say that we are there to give any lessons, but the people who are going through conflict, some of them have come to Rwanda to learn from what we call our homegrown solutions that have helped us to recover, to be able to be where we are. And they have been institutionalized in what they call Rwanda Convention, Cooperation Institute. So all the stuff Rwanda has done from the moment, including justice, including the recovery, including socioeconomic initiative, they are put somewhere where people can actually come and be trained. We've had a number of countries, and even discussing it, I remember I was in G20 in Argentina, and they were talking about that South-South cooperation where people can really share on good practices that can help one nation, can help another nation, and help each other. And we learn from other people of what they have done in those areas. So I think this will be, it will take a whole time to tell you, but what I'm saying, I think it was, first of all, one of the best leadership one can get, because they took us on a journey that was not an easy one, where you had to take the hardest decisions sometimes, but they took the people with them. It was a learning process for all Rwandans to be able to get where we are. And it's a continuous journey, the journey of reconciliation, the journey of development. It's an ongoing journey, but we are still together as a people. So that's what I would say.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. I want to go to our audience again, and there's a question, two questions here that strike me as similar. One is from a teacher of history. This person teaches history of Africa, and they have a class. Their class, at least some from their class are online with us, and they wanted to know if you were to speak to these students many of whom are here, they're saying, what main message should they take with them into life about Africa's past and Africa's future? And the other question that is very closely related, it says here, I would like the ambassador to share her thoughts on the two issues of insufficient human capacity and widespread corruption as barriers to the vision of one Africa. So I think those two questions are somewhat similar.
So Africa came from a very, how would I say it? It comes from a very tough background. And since you are history students, you're able to understand that from a historical point of view, Africa started to be independent in the 1960s. And some of them, countries like my country, if I count, I really say it's 27, 28 years, because whatever was there was destroyed as well. So what I'm saying, so you have to see the advances of Africa, put them in a context and a historical context. One is that they are coming from a very tough, history. Two questions, for instance, you can think about. Africa was not allowed to make their own diplomacy. They were not allowed to use their own products. As a matter of fact, if you look, all the productions, it was one-way street. They went to the ports going to Europe. Africa never used the products then because they didn't belong to Africa. And if you look from, and so at the time of high industrialization of the rest of the world, Africa was in colonialism. They were not developing. That's why we are lagging in certain things that many people take for granted. So that you have to understand. Right now, when we are talking about, for instance, leapfrogging into technology, most countries are leapfrogging, but they don't have industries. Because again, it's that kind of mechanism that was taking the thing. So that's what we are trying to redress with the African Continental Free Trade. Building infrastructure, building very sufficient industries that are going to feed the continent and many different things. So we are coming from a disadvantage point of view. So now the second question, maybe you are talking about even capacity building. This is why even partnerships are important. That's why we come to the United States to get people, schools, to get people like you, to come and contribute, to look at diaspora, because we are still in need of capacity building in many different ways. And again, the main reason for that, I have to give you one example. In 1962, for you, maybe you were not born, but I was. So 1962.
I was born.
Okay. So, but in 1962, in my country, when it became independent, you could find two people who are educated, like two. Some of the colonial system didn't even educate people, meaning that we are talking about even the capacity to be able to rebuild right after independence. It took a long time to get, competent leaders, the ones who are coming and are going to take the reins of power and be able to take Africa to where we want it to be. So it's something, it's a growing thing. That's why our institutions are growing. That's why our capacity is growing, but also it behooves many people who can bring that, capacity building, partnerships in Africa that could be mutually beneficial to both ends. So that's for students, that's what I would encourage you to do. And the last is about corruption. You said the corruption.
Yes.
So I don't know what I can say about corruption. Corruption is global. Corruption is global, but it becomes devastating when you are still underdeveloped, because it takes away from the few areas of development. So if your country doesn't take the issue of corruption seriously, then you are looking at a country that is never going to develop, because you have fewer resources, if you don't account for those resources, if whatever is coming is going in somebody's pockets, you'll get failing state and failed state. So that's why I'm saying that's more devastating, but at the same time also, let's say that corruption is a global phenomenon. But when it comes to countries that are still developing, it becomes more devastating, I would say.
Just a quick comment, and then I'll go to another question. Even though the comment about corruption is correct, it is global. However, at least in my work and research, I've used President Kagame and Rwanda as a good example of somehow bringing that under control. I'm not sure exactly how they did that, but I guess he followed the model of Singapore. But right now, somehow corruption has been very, very much controlled in Rwanda, and maybe that's what the questioner had. How do we spread that kind of discipline around the rest of the continent to really bring down corruption?
And that's maybe I was first in saying for our country, that was again, when you don't put yourself in the center, when you put the people in the center, it's the overriding philosophy behind even tackling corruption. We want our people to develop. So it's the people who have the centrality of it. When usually people who are corrupt are also selfish people.
Yes.
Or they want to do this thing. Our leadership is the leadership that is really all the stuff we've done, and I can tell you all the initiative. Actually, there's one that is taking place at the end of the month. And I can, when you have a chance to be in Rwanda, I would really encourage you to attend what they call the National Leadership Retreat. The National, it's a leadership retreat and other things. Those come because people face and they talk about their issues, but it's to care for the citizens. It goes all the way down to the local government, to the central government, for people to bring all their issues, and if anything is not going right. And those are things that have tackled the corruption and other things, because the people themselves have a say in what is happening in their lives. And this is because, again, coming from what I'm saying, it's about the accountability that our leadership is put in the forefront of whatever we do. It's the accountability process. You have to account for the people who are, if you are a leader, you are leading, or even in your area. So it has become a culture. As a matter of fact, 2 days ago, there was a story. Someone who was visiting Rwanda, and it's in the news, so it's in the newspaper. But he was very, very surprised because he lost his money. It was a lot of cash. He lost it when he was boarding a bus or something. And people spent 3 hours trying to locate him, and they brought his whole amount, the whole amount of money. He put it in the paper. He said, I have never seen this thing before. I have never seen where someone can get cash. It's not even a credit card, and you are able to return the money. So it's something that we tackled from the beginning, to use our resources very prudently, because it's for the whole Rwanda. It's not for one individual. So I think, and then what I'm saying, how do you help other people? Actually, we really have strong collaboration with many African nations. We have bilateral relationships with many countries where we share good practices with many different countries. And I'm not going to name the countries, but we share. And we probably learn from them as well on other things. But that's and also it helps our economy by knowing that when you go in Rwanda, your money, you can start your business in 6 hours online, and very well your business will be fine if you follow the protocol. And what I'm saying, ensuring that also has helped us. It has brought dividends. We have increased in tourism and hosting many events that are of international caliber and many different things, because people trust what we do. So it's also for ourselves, but more importantly, it's the right thing to do in terms of the direction we have to give our people and our country as we move forward.
Okay, I think Ambassador Mukantabana, I want to close here because we now have 5 more minutes before we will need to close. But there's a question here, and I hope the questioner was still around. I think he may have gone, but he was interested, would like to ask about the unrest along the Rwanda DRC border. And I hope he could expand on that more, but he's not here. But I'm wondering if there's any comments you can make in regards to that. The reason why I bring this up is that some other person, when I send them this, the fact that you'll be speaking to us, also have similar questions about that.
It's a question that really can take us to a longer answer, but since we don't have much time, I'll say maybe a few lines.
Okay.
What I can tell you is that some of the history that we didn't go into are part of this. They are roots of the crisis that is in our region that were never addressed. And some of it go a long way during colonialism and when those borders, the ones that I mentioned, the artificial borders that were imposed between countries. And as you know, and as you remember, I'm not teaching history here, but they didn't care about the ethno-history of people living in those countries. European countries were in Berlin, they drew the boundaries and they put certain people who might have been brothers or sisters in 2 different countries. Yes. And that's the reality in the whole Africa. So if you know what is happening in Rwanda, not in Rwanda, but in our region, it has happened in many other places because of those artificial boundaries. So the problem is that, quickly, what I can tell you is that one of the regions in eastern part of DRC, where the Great Lakes, what we call Great Lakes, and what happened is that the boundary where the people are, or the western area, is that the people living there, who live there traditionally, who are the natives of the land, are people who were Rwandophone, they spoke Kinyarwanda. But by nationality, by citizenship, they are Congolese because of those borders, right?
Yes.
And you remember that the African Union, all the heads of state have decided that in order not to open any Pandora box of whatever problem, we keep the borders. So that's the problem. Not the problem, but that's the reality we have. But the problem we had in the region, 1994, this is way past that period of the boundaries. But these people always sporadically, depending upon who was in power, just like many other places, they will be considered the Rwandans instead of being Congolese. So they were discriminated against. And this was magnified by the events in 1994 in Rwanda. Because when the genocide happened, more than 2 million people went to Congo, in the eastern DRC. And the majority of the people who went to DRC were the killers, right? And they took the weapons. And for all those years, we have been battling insurgents, the people who went to DRC with their weapons, because they took everything. You know, Rwanda was empty by the time people got there in terms of any stuff. These people, for several years, they were actually doing wars of insurgency, coming back to finish what they had in Rwanda. And the policies of during that time, the president was in DRC, instead of removing the people who came from Rwanda and take them far away, because usually when you have refugees, you don't put them, especially if they are fighting. There are some international agreements that you take them far away from the border, because these people, you see what I mean? You can't keep them at the border when these people were the ones who were doing exactions in the other country. So that was that. Rwanda still has the problem with what they call FDR, who are armed groups from those people who left in 1994. The problem then, why is the situation tense and the entire Rwanda sentiment in the DRC? It's because these people have been integrated within the army in the DRC, some of them. But with them, they also carried the whole venom, because the genocide ideology doesn't end because the genocide stops. So that's what we have been. So we try to finish with this. Now the people in the eastern part of DRC, who again have been discriminated against, they are known as the M23. They took up arms because some of the agreements between the DRC and them, as the Congolese, were broken. So they started again to fight. When they started, again, the entire Rwanda came, like those people were Rwandans. But as I told you, these are Congolese, but they happen to be within, that particular thing. So the problem is that it's very, very difficult now to really even control, because the whole entire Rwanda sentiment almost reminiscent to what happened in 1994. The entire Rwanda sentiment, the calling for killing people, the machetes and stuff. But
Yes.
it's because the same ideology by the same individuals has been carried and is alive in that particular thing. So the problem now we have, and the good thing that we are promoting, and I hope that for people who, the East African community has gotten together, because also DRC is part now of the East African community. So we have Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, South Sudan, and now DRC. They've gotten together and they've agreed that a regional force will come and try to provide a certain zone of tampon. And then people are going to try to have a political dialogue, because this has to be through dialogue and political stuff, because without understanding what came from what used to be, and then you continue and people are continuing this. Number one, Rwanda is not interested in any war. We are focusing much in what we are trying to achieve in building our nation, in the domestic agenda, and many other things, engagements. But what I can tell you, we are part, and we support the East African Initiative and all the people who have tried to bring some kind of,
All right.
arbitration. So I think you
All
have,
right.
yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ambassador. I'm so sorry we didn't, I can see, I can tell you, Ambassador, that I have not gone through all my questions, and the questions from the audience, we've only took a sample of it. So I'm going to turn this back over now to Dr. Betty and let her take it from there and bring us to a close.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. That was a wonderful program. Reminded me why I love that continent so much. And I think every time we have a good program like this on Africa, it's bring better understanding. I think people think Africa, it's 52 countries, extremely diverse.
Right.
And I lived in the southern section of it, and I got to travel many other parts, but people just assume I can speak to all of Africa. No, I cannot. Only to this, it's a huge, very diverse, very eclectic. So thank you. This was a wonderful program. Thank you so much. And you might be interested in coming back. Well, we would hope that you would come back for other programs. I thought I saw something here about Africa going forward, but I did not. But I want to tell our audience, do please come back. This year, Great Decisions is every 2 weeks, and our next program, I'll tell you about distinguished speakers in a moment, but this is our very active program year, and this is February the 14th, but on February the 28th, we have a program that's a Tuesday night, Iran and the Gulf States, Iran's status in the world. And that will be Dr. Pierre Atlas, and many of you know Dr. Atlas, and you'll come and hear that. And then 2 weeks later after that, on March the 14th, we have China's Push for Global Dominance. And the ambassador, that might be a program you might want to come back, because I think that we've seen China. There was a question, I heard more than one, on the China relation in Africa as they have in Latin America. And I was curious, perhaps I could ask at another time when we connect. The USAID and the State Department had decades of investment in Africa, and then along comes China and a different relationship. But I was curious about the differences between the two relationships, but you might want to come back and join us. China's push for global dominance. We will have Dr. Young Pak with us that evening.
Mm.
And 1 month from now, on March the 16th, we will have another Distinguished Speakers Program. And I think that this will attract many of you. Is there a cultural war on women? This is a program that sparked our interest because what we saw happen to women in Afghanistan last year. And now they're just all but silenced since they are now no longer allowed to work, go to school past the 6th grade, and the school they're going to attend is not going to be a Western education, opening them up to the opportunities that the young Afghans enjoyed for a few decades. And then now with Iran has just exploded, and the women have demonstrated tremendous bravery. And so the women in Africa, ambassador, so that might be another program. We have 2 women already slated for that, Barbara Slavin and Dr. Asal Rod. And if those names are familiar, is because you may have heard them as they provide commentary on NPR, BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera. So that is going to be a very interesting evening, March the 16th. All of these programs are free. You just have to register to get a Zoom link. And again, I want to thank you, Ambassador. It was a wonderful program. And as always, I wish Donald did have time for all of those questions. And, we would be here till 9 or 9:30. You see, this is where we could just open the logger and just.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Berry. It was, I attended some of your programs. They sound interesting. And by the way, before I finish, you are all invited to Rwanda so you can come and see firsthand, and maybe we'll have a forum when you're there.
Well, Rwanda's very close to Malawi, that I know, and I had an opportunity to spend and actually when I was going to Africa, I wanted to get more into that Central African region because it is so lush and green and beautiful. And to me, that is just that's when I think of Africa, I think that. And then when I got my assignment, I thought, well, where is this country? And I said, well, how close is it? This was during South Africa's apartheid. I said, well, just as long as it's not too close to South Africa. Well, Lesotho is completely surrounded by South Africa, and it's not lush and green. It's anything but. I met my husband there, so it wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so
All right. Well, this is the part of the evening I really don't like at all. You know, when we're in person, we can just sort of gently leave the room, and people hustle her, and they get to have some more conversations, and they practically walk out to the parking lot with her, and we're not going to abruptly flip the switch to say goodnight, but we will have to turn that light off. But good night, all of you, and please come back and join us. For those of you who are here the first time, we impressed you enough that you'll come back again and again. And I have to also say, please consider being a member. We don't have an awful lot of cost to what we do, but we do have operating costs. And it would help us so much if you would become a member, because it tells us that you support what we do. And also donations. We also are very open to donations. I will tell you one thing about membership. We do try to write grants here and there to help defray some of our operating costs. And it says a lot if we can say, well, we have this thriving membership of the number of people who support us. And that number is extremely important. So please think about that. We are providing these programs free to you, and we enjoy doing that a great deal. And we could certainly use your support. It would help us a great deal. I think our basic membership starts at $50. And so it's really not bad at all. You can be a global citizen for $150.
Nice.
Not bad.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Good night now.
Good night, everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Night.
And thank you, Amy. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, board members, for coming. Thank you, Donald. Oh my gosh, did he leave already? Oh, no. He did a great job. He won a wonderful job. Okay, I think we are leaving the room. So I think we have to turn off the lights.
Yep, I just am going to end the meeting for all. So have a great evening.
Thank you, Amy.
Bye, Amy.